We're about to enter year 2 of the J.J. Picollo era. Just how different is he from Dayton Moore? Let's find out on this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. It's also very easy to find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we are on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. And again, you can always find me easily on Twitter. If you just want to follow along on YouTube, that is fine as well. But if you want to know a little bit more about me, I work in sports here in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Got a show once a week there. Stay very busy in the producing world, and we'll have more on that coming up here in the next few weeks, but I can't be too open about it here right now. But when you click on this podcast, when you watch this episode and any episode moving forward at that, you know that you were getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, and we're almost there. We are at the start of the regular season. Right now, we are 16 days away. Just 16 days away from when the Royals take on the Minnesota Twins to kick off Game 1 of 162. We'll see just how different this Royals team is. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. We've got a lot of great stuff to bring up about them throughout today's episode, so in about 10 to 15 minutes or so, we're going to dive into that just a little bit more. What I wanted to dive into to kick off the show today is, something that a listener brought up to me on Twitter earlier, because I wanted to, jump back into the swing of things and let the listeners dictate really what we were going to talk about for the first couple episodes of this week. Since I didn't bring you an episode on Monday, we're going to stretch it into a Saturday this coming week, because we always want to give you 5 episodes a week. If we don't have one on one of the weekdays, we almost always will find time on Saturday or Sunday to give you some Royals content. But what I wanted to do was give the listeners to kind of voice what they wanted to talk about, because we didn't have a traditional Mailbag Friday, that last Friday, in fact, and we really only answered those questions on Twitter. And usually we take all those questions, of course, as you know, and we answer them on an entire 30-minute episode. So I wanted to get this opportunity for fans to text me, tweet me, whatever it would be, some segment ideas, some things they wanted to talk about. One that caught my interest was the topic of J.J. Picollo and more. And I think for a lot of fans wondering, just how different are these guys? How are things being operated in a different way? And I thought it would be a good segment to go into, because being down in Surprise, I had the opportunity to talk with some people. I'm not going to name those sources, but I had to talk with some people about the way things have gone, the way things are different, and how it's changed for the better. For starters, I never really thought it was fair for J.J. Picollo in his first year as the general manager to be dubbed Dayton 2.0. I understand this is a business about winning, and he didn't win a lot in year 1. They won 56 games, and it was the team that he assembled from the offseason. But I do think there were some stark differences between J.J. Picollo and Dayton Moore and how they operated. And really, we've seen this year with this offseason, the Royals have operated in a much different way than they ever really did under Dayton Moore. Dayton Moore was very much invested in building it from within. He was able to take 9 years or so, more so 7. So we'll say 7 or so years. Maybe I go even shorter than that since taking over as the acting general manager back in 2006. But remember, the Royals had one of the best farm in like 2010, 2011. So Dayton Moore built that up. And then what did we all see happen? Of course, they all come up together and then win a World Series together. So he was very much invested in we want to build this thing from within. I do not want to spend much money. Now, I think it also was a little bit of influence from the Glass family that they didn't want to put that much money into the team. And Dayton Moore showed over the course of, what would it have been, 16 years or so, that it was going to be his guys. He was going to go after his type of player, and it did not really matter what those guys' numbers were. And with JJ Picollo, I do think there is more of a investment into the analytical side of things. I believe that last year, with as little as the Royals had, they did a little bit more with less, where in previous years under Dayton Moore, they did a lot less with more. They had pieces to trade. They chose to hang on to some guys because they were quote-unquote good clubhouse guys. I mean, I'll never forget in one of those final years in the Dayton Moore era, the Royals decided to hang on to Ian Kennedy when he had a 20-plus save season, kind of had revived his career, and they hung on to him, only for the team to lose a lot of games the next year. Like, it was those little things that made you wonder, what's going on here? What's the end goal? How close you are to contention? If there is anything that in a 106 loss season I can credit JJ Picollo for, it's that they were very open and honest about what they expected from that year, what their goal was. There was a lot of times in the Dayton Moore era, I'm not really sure they were completely honest or they were just overconfident in themselves. I think everybody can look at, who they are and what their team is and seriously evaluate what their possibility at contention could be. I mean, I look at teams around baseball right now. I feel like people that work in the Rockies organization, work in the A's organization, you evaluate where they're at and what their division look like and goes, I don't think it's going to happen this year. I don't think this is a playoff team. We need to try to get positives out of this season, but I don't think there is a true title contender in there. And I think they failed to do that for a number of years in the Dayton Moore era, which set them back in 2020, 2021, 22. And the failed draft picks didn't help as well. And I still think the jury's out on if JJ Picollo and Danny Ontiveros and guys that are involved in the front office and scouting department, if they are actually different, right? There were new voices, new faces that came in to work in the front office this year, and we'll get to see what it looks like in year one with this new draft class. But there just wasn't a lot of turnover. There wasn't a lot of change. And there's another difference there for me. From the time Dayton Moore took over in 2006 and then eventually was forced to resign in 2022, or at the end of 2022. Was that right? Or the end of 2000? No, it was the end of 2022. So at that point in time, you looked at all the change that had happened in the Royals organization, and it just wasn't much. There was not a lot of guys coming into the organization. There was kind of this, abrasiveness toward change. It was done things a successful way one time in the mid 2010s. Maybe you could say twice, but I would say overall, the Royals didn't really want to adapt to the new age of baseball. The old age, the stone age of baseball, which, yes, I can call it that because baseball is always changing. Here in a couple of years, this will be considered the stone age, whereas other teams were adapting, finding guys that were a better fit for the modern day baseball, and the Royals kind of stuck to what got them there in 14 and 15. They valued the speed and defense and not much of a power hitter. They wanted a contact guy. They wanted a strong bullpen, but never really found guys that fit the modern day strength of a bullpen. And when you look at that, there just wasn't ever really a good fit for those 2018 and 2020 teams. The guys they were going after didn't fit the modern day baseball, idea of what was deemed successful. And now we're seeing this change with the Royals. You're finding Cole Reagans, finding James MacArthur, finding guys that can fit that model. Those are just two examples there. But then somebody like Nelson Velasquez going after a power bat, trading, a everyday reliever and a big league bullpen for a guy that hadn't been given much of a shot and seemed to flourish in a limited time in Kansas City. Just some of those moves last year made you think things are a little bit different. And this offseason, we've seen with more of a push from the owner and John Sherman giving more money to spend, J.J. Picollo has been able to shine in some of those areas. So I do think, along the lines, there were great qualities of Dayton Moore. He always cared about the game and his players. But I think in the end, his unwillingness to change really led to the eventual downfall. Well, J.J. Picollo, I think, was always that bright, analytical mind that now is getting an opportunity to show that he's not just a 2.0 version. He is somebody that can take this team to the next level and have that sustainability, multiple playoff appearances, multiple championships down the road. But again, he's got to go out there and do it. The first year as a general manager, he lost 106 games. It's got to be a big step up in year two, which again begins in looks like 16 days. Yeah, I said that earlier, 16 days. I had to double check the date here on my computer. That to me is just wild to think about how quickly the offseason can wrap up. Maybe to some of you guys, it's felt pretty long. To me, it feels like it has sped along pretty quickly, but can't wait for that game here in about 16 days. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, who do I believe is going to be the opening day starter and maybe some more roster moves to come? That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go further, want to give a shout out to one of the title sponsors today in PrizePicks. And there's so much great that you can find with PrizePicks, even though football season may be over. The action on the floor, though, is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of the year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into some serious cash. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy betting app. So here's what you need to do. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that code is LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDON MLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100 on. And you know that March Madness is one of the greatest times here in the country, and PrizePicks is what you can use to go out there and start winning some money. But again, be sure to use that code of LOCKEDONMLB. Well, going off the topic of what our first segment was, I opened it up to listeners and followers to send me some segment ideas on what may be interesting to you, maybe someone that's been in the back of your mind for a while and you just wanted answers on. And another one of the followers asked about the opening day starter, some more roster moves to come. And our third segment today is going to be about John McMillon being sent down to Omaha, but I think we can tie that in to a second segment here as well. With John McMillon going down to Omaha, that does give more clarity to what this team may look like, what this bullpen will look like, and maybe more specifically what this rotation looks like. Now, the rotation, it's got its guys in there. I've been asked about Alec Marsh. I've been asked about Angel Serpa. Been asked about Daniel Litch. Jordan Lyles did not have a setback when he started throwing again today, and that was a good sign for the Royals. Dairon Blanco also with his calf injury seems to be minor. He'll just take a few days rest. Seems like everybody's getting back into the swing of things, and no major injuries have happened of yet down in Surprise, Arizona for the Royals. The question, though, everybody's been wondering is, well, what is this rotation going to look like 1 through 5? We know who's pretty much going to be in it. You know that Cole Reagans is going to be in there. We know that Waka, Lugo is going to be in there. Singer, Lyles. Those to me are the 5. Assuming they all stay healthy coming out of camp, those are the 5. Now, the bigger question maybe of who's in the rotation or what it's going to be 1 through 5 is who's the opening day starter. As little as it really is in the grand scheme of things, I mean, it's really a dot. It's one game. It's the first game of the year. There's hope. There's optimism. Kauffman Stadium will be sold out. It'll be fun. It may be the only time Kauffman Stadium is sold out this year. Hoping not, but just every single year, that's the game you can always count on, assuming the weather is really good. And I know the weather app I'm just continuously checking up on, and we'll probably know, 10 days out when we'll get the actual weather, or at least an estimate of what the weather could be. But we know it's going to be a pretty good crowd. And for a lot of fans, including myself, having Cole opening day starter would be electric. It'd be Cole Reagans versus Pablo Lopez. 2 Cy Young contenders this year. The Royals in all their hope, their flair, their passion, their intensity in the offseason. They get to showcase that game one with a guy that everybody's fallen in love with the pure stuff that he's got. And I know that at the beginning of this offseason, when the Royals signed Michael Wacha and signed Seth Lugo in December, it felt like those two guys are going to be the front runners because you sign those veterans, those guys that have done this before, and make one of them the opening day starter so you don't put the pressure or all the heat on a guy who's never done it before. Now, my opinion's not going to change. I think the Royals should start Cole Reagans. That's where I will continue to stand. That is the hill I will die on. I'm not really going to be budged off that. There will be people in the comments on YouTube or on Twitter that say, come on now. We don't need to make Cole Reagans the ace. I think he wants to be that guy to take on the pressure. I mean, he's seen what the national audience is saying about it. How he's a dark horse to win the Cy Young. He can be one of the league's best pitchers. Imagine hearing that and then saying, well, I don't want to be the number one. I want to be the number 3. It is up at the end of the day to Matt Quattrero and this coaching staff to make the right call. However, one evidence that I just chose to neglect, maybe out of denial, for the past few weeks is how the rotation has been set up in spring. We are getting a very consistent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with an extension to 6, 7, and 8. And those 6, 7, and 8 guys are Marsh, Serpa, and Lynch. The other couple of arms that are competing for the 5th spot in the rotation. But with Reagans, Wacha, Lugo, and Singer, and Lyles, before Lyles got banged up, it was a pretty consistent pattern. Who's starting every single day? If that game gets rained out like it was last Thursday, they go throw a simulated game. They don't skip them or move them to the next day. If they were supposed to throw on that day, that is the day they're going to throw, even if it's against nobody. It's just, again, as I said, a simulated game. Michael Wacha lines up to start opening day. Going back to his first start, beginning of spring training, but the end of February. That's how I should have said it. He is lining up to start every 5th game, and that hasn't changed. And if they continue that process, even with off days, because, right, there will be that gap when they're done in Surprise, they will travel up to, or across to, I should say, Northwest Arkansas and take on the Naturals, their AA affiliate, for one exhibition game. And I'd imagine they'll start somebody like an Alec Marsh, or they will start a Daniel Lynch or an Angel Serpa, and that will line it up for Michael Wacha to start opening day. Even with those days off, it just feels like the likely scenario at this point. I haven't really been given the feeling or the indication that it's going to be Cole Reagans. At this point, am starting to settle in that it's going to be Michael Wacha. I could always be wrong. And my dream pick of Cole Reagans being the opening day starter could be true. But right now, just going off the scheduling and what I believe is going to happen, I think it's going to be Michael Wacha going game 1 and then Cole Reagans game 2. But I also could see Seth Lugo being game 2 and then Cole Reagans game 3. But those top 3 are absolutely going to be throwing in that first series against Minnesota. As for some roster moves, we are getting down to some of the harsher cuts. John McMillon is going to be up in Kansas City in no time. He just needs to get synced back up, is what Matt Quattrero said when I was down there in Surprise. It doesn't seem like there's any injury concern there. It was more so about getting that command back to where it needs to be. And he had a late start in spring, so there's no need to force the issue, overwork him, and then throw him in the bullpen. I'd imagine Hernandez and McMillon are not going to be on the opening day roster at this point. As for some other guys, I do not think that Dayron Blanco is going to be ready. I know it was a mild setback, but these days matter now at the end of it. I hope that he's all 100% and this doesn't linger, but I can see the Royals turning to maybe Drew Waters as that 4th outfielder for the time being. And then for the utility spot in the infield, I know this is going to hurt a lot of Royals fans, but I don't see Nick Lofton at this point making it just because Garrett Hampson and Adam Frazier are on major league contracts. Now, with all the guys I just mentioned with roster cuts, I believe Nick Lofton and I believe Dayron Blanco and Hernandez and McMillon are all going to be in Kansas City before maybe even May. They might get that quick of a chance up to Kansas City, depending on how things go about it. But I also look at the value of playing every single day and who are the guys that need it. Nick Lofton needs to play every single day. If Michael Massey's not working out in Kansas City and Adam Frazier and Hampson are not, I want Nick Lofton starting at the big league level. I need McMillon and Hernandez outings at least every 2 days or so, every 3 days, so they can really get back on the same page. And Dairon Blanco, he's going to be a fourth outfielder, so I'm not really worried about how much playing time he gets in Omaha. But to me, he is going to be a better fit long-term as a fourth outfielder than maybe Drew Waters is. And if he is healthy, maybe the Royals look at it the opposite way and say Waters needs everyday at bats, so let's put Blanco up as the fourth outfielder. He can even let that calf heal up a little bit because he won't be playing for the first couple series of the year. But that's kind of where I'm at with the opening day starter and some roster moves or more roster moves to come throughout the next few days or so. Okay, before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the Free Fire TV channels app. When we return, a little bit more on John McMillon and why it's not a bad move for him to start the year in Omaha. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, or on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to the other sponsor of today's show, in Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences for smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. It's so simple to use. They give you so many options. And like I said, opening day is right around the corner. March Madness right around the corner. NBA in full swing. Go get your Fire TV set up. It's very simple to do. And you can have that unlimited access to sports games and also millions and millions of TV shows, movies, all of that great stuff. So go get your Fire TV set up today. Well, the last thing I wanted to dive into was just the news of this morning or early afternoon. John McMillon being sent down to Omaha to begin the year. It does hurt my roster projection and maybe my preseason hot take, which was that John McMillon was going to be this team's best reliever in the bullpen. Still very possible, right? I'm not going to punt on that idea. But now a hurdle has been put in front of him. Because even though I would like to say, well, this is all smooth. You go down to Omaha for a few weeks, you get things ironed out, you get things fine-tuned, and you'll be up in Kansas City in no time. I believe that is going to happen. But if it doesn't, that's the hurdle you deal with. Like if he goes down to Omaha and the command's not there, it's going to just be prolonged. That he's not up in Kansas City's bullpen in May, in June, in July. Again, I've got full confidence John McMillon's not going to spend that much time in Omaha because there doesn't seem to be an injury concern here. It's just getting back into the swing of things, getting back built up, all things that are very important. But the Royals also understand that for this team to be the best version of itself, a healthy bullpen is important. And if they would have forced the issue or tried to rush him to Kansas City for opening day, and he wasn't really synced up, you could cause for an injury, or you have a guy that's just simply not ready to go. I mean, we talked about it in length this offseason with Brady Singer in his offseason last year. Different for a guy in the rotation, but they tried to rush him through spring training when his arm wasn't really built up. And we saw what turned out to be a very poor 2023 season. With McMillon and Hernandez, you can slow play it a little bit. You know, when I look at the bullpen, McMillon and Hernandez were going to have roles. They were going to have innings they settled into, but they were not the closer. They were not the setup guy. You know, it feels like the closer for this team is Will Smith. The setup guy is going to be James MacArthur. I feel like that, to me, is the most likely scenario at this point. And then you've got Nick Anderson. You've got John Schreiber, right? You've got Chris Stratton. You got guys that can pencil in as the 6'6" guy. You need that long reliever. I'd imagine Alec Marsh will be one of those guys. And then maybe you have one of the long shots. They're going to be looking for a lefty, so Sam Long has had a really good spring. Josh Taylor has had a really good spring for the Royals. Maybe if they just wanted to have the long relief version of a lefty, they could go with Serpa or Daniel Lynch and then pencil in Alec Marsh as that last guy in the bullpen. But there are some opportunities now to just give that last spot that would have been McMillon's to somebody who may not be there long term. He's just the stopgap guy. He's just a guy that you can put as a placeholder before McMillon or Hernandez to go. There is marginal depth for this bullpen. Not great depth, just marginal to get you through a month, which I do think is important here. If you can get Josh Taylor or Angel Serpa or Sam Long or Tyler Duffy, even though Tyler Duffy has more of a comeback of his own, diagnosed with, I believe, melanoma. And so he might join the Royals later on in spring training. So he's probably not going to be on the big league roster to begin the year. But some of those guys, those non-roster invites, they can be that stopgap guy for the first month of the year and then can always be replaced. Or if they can keep their spot, somebody else gets forced out. But if you can have that stability and that consistency from somebody that's had a really good spring training, well, then you don't feel that build up John McMillon or Carlos Hernandez down in AAA to begin the year. I do not think it's going to be that long. I think it's going to be a short stint there. Make sure you're all synced up. Make sure you're all ready to go. We won't be talking about many issues as we get closer to the end of April and the beginning part of May. Do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJannersBean. Before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to go over a little bit of what happened in Cole Reagan's last start and some guys that are really starting to turn it around in spring training. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.